Hi everyone, and welcome to Moonee Valley Libraries. As always, I'd like to start by saying that Moonee Valley City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurrundjeri Woi Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, their spirits, ancestors, elders and community members past and present. So welcome again, everyone. Over the last few years, the Moonee Valley Libraries has been hosting several craft groups that meet in our physical branches, and they've been chatting and making new friends and sharing reading ideas and lots of ideas and thoughts about crafting. Today, we're lucky enough to be launching our online craft groups, and we're lucky to have Dr. Angela Savage here to share some of her crafting stories with us. Angela is an award-winning Melbourne author who has lived and travelled extensively in Asia. She's written a number of books, predominantly mysteries from what I gather, and she has a PhD in creative writing from Monash Uni. Angela is also a wonderful, wonderful creative craftsperson. I've seen a lot of her work and she will share it with us today. And I will let her do some talking. So welcome, Angela.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks to the Moonee Valley Library. I'm really thrilled to be here. Yes, wearing multiple hats. So I feel like I'm here in part as the CEO of Public Libraries Victoria, part of a new sector for me that I'm very, very excited to be championing and working with. Partly here as a writer, as an author, and largely here as a crafter, which is a really nice situation to be in. I don't often get asked to talk about craft in public, but it's really delightful to be able to do that. And I understand that you've had a craft group, a very active craft group at Moonee Valley Libraries for some time, but that COVID, of course, has thrown up challenges when it comes to meeting face-to-face and crafting collectively, and that your online Craft Connects is going to provide another mechanism and another way that people can come together and craft. And I have myself recently joined my first online craft group. This one's called Pointless Crafts, and it specialises in making really useless things. But it's a lovely group of women, and it's a very supportive group. And I can vouch, so from personal experience, that while the transition to online crafting isn't quite the same, it can produce a really nice dynamic, and it can be really fun too. So I wish you all the very best with that. So just as a bit of a preamble to the formal launch part, I thought I would talk a little bit about my crafting history and my current preoccupations. So I've prepared a few pictures, and I'm just going to share my screen with you so that I can show you a little bit about what I've been doing. But just a little bit of background. I have been a wool-based craftsperson for a long time. I'm terrible at sewing. I can't even sew a straight line with a sewing machine, but I can knit and crochet a lot of different things. My mum taught me to knit, and I was taught to crochet by a really lovely older woman who lived opposite our primary school, and a group of us were taken to her home of an afternoon each week to learn crochet, and she would give us raspberry cordial and sweet biscuits, and it's a really beautiful memory. I wish I had a better memory though, because I know from one of my fellow crafters that she actually she's also an archivist, and looked up this woman later down the track and found that she was actually quite prominent in the Melbourne craft community. So we were very lucky to have had that experience. And I think for a long time I've loved crafting, and particularly small things. Like I've made a lot, traditionally I would make a lot of baby clothes and toys for babies, because in my working life I often took on very big projects and worked in the not-for-profit field for a very long time. I worked in international development for a long time. I worked for the not-for-profit sector in Victoria for a long time. I'm a novelist, so I was often taking on projects that you put a lot of effort into and you didn't always see a return, or it was a very kind of different outcome from what you might have anticipated. Things would often not turn out quite the way you wanted. And I think I took comfort in being able to follow a pattern, put in effort A and get result B. And that was something that just, it's a bit like also why I do jigsaw puzzles, I think, as well. You know, it gives you something kind of concrete in your life. So there's always been an element of why I've been crafting in that respect. But most recently, I started something which I've ended up calling Literary Critters, and I wanted to tell you the story behind that. Literary Critters actually started life as an idea of how to promote my my novel, which was released last year. It's called Mother of Pearl. There it is in the middle of the screen, on the top, in the top photo, and to the left down the bottom. So this is my fourth novel. It's my first non-crime novel, and it was released in August 2019. And I'd lined up a whole lot of festivals for 2020 to speak about this book. And of course, you know, there was the cascade of COVID-related cancellations, and suddenly I was very fortunate. I still was able to attend a number of festivals online and to speak to the book, but you know, it's not the same as being at a festival where people can buy the book on the spot, where you can sign books, where you can talk with individual readers about the work. So I was sort of racking my brains for what can I do for this book? How can I help this book? And I thought, well, you know, for years I've been making birds. That's just something I did. I used to make them particularly for my daughter's school fete, and they would sell very well, and so they were quite popular. And I thought, oh, well, I'll make some birds. There's I love birds, and I include a lot of birds in my writing. And there's a scene in Mother of Pearl in my novel that involves a group of rainbow lorikeets and a wattlebird. I thought, okay, I'll make a rainbow lorikeet to go with my books. And I felt kind of self-conscious about just promoting my own book. So I thought, I'll also throw in some other birds inspired by my reading, books that I've loved. And so you can see from the photos, Aoife Clifford is a local, she's Fairfield-based crime writer, and the red-tailed black cockatoo was featured in her novel Second Sight, which I loved. And for Leah Hills, for her beautiful novel The Crying Place, I made a galah that was inspired by a scene in that book. And then in the second pack, I had another rainbow lorikeet for Mother of Pearl, which I also matched with a kookaburra from Carrie Tiffany's wonderful Mateship with Birds, and a yellow-tailed black cockatoo, which is known as bilir in Wurrundjeri language, and that's referenced in Tara June Winch's award-winning novel The Yield. So I sort of put these out there as packs and said, you know, for people who would review my book online somewhere on their blog or Goodreads or Amazon or whatever, I'd take their names, put them in a drawer and pull out 2 winners and give them the birds. So I did that. And that was fun. It was a nice exercise, but also generated a lot of interest on my social media channels. People were saying how much they loved the birds, were kind of making them happy. And I thought, you know, we were in the middle of lockdown. And this seemed like a very small way to just, you know, contribute to a little bit of happiness in otherwise bleak times. So I sort of kept going after I finished these ones. The next lot were inspired by my reading. And I was just saying to Jenny before we started, before we came on screen, that I was partly inspired by Justine Hanna, one of your librarians, who, by her podcast, because she matches, you know, in her podcast, she matches books to food and drink. And I thought, oh, pairs them. And I thought pairing, that's a really nice way of putting it. So I decided I would pair what I was reading with literary critters and make things. And it started off as birds. I think after the first lot of birds, I went to The Raven there for Stone Sky Gold Mountain by Wurrundjeri Woi Wurrung, which is an absolutely beautiful novel. And then I got kind of interested in other critters, particularly I think the first one was inspired by Meg Mundell's novel The Trespassers, with that beautiful pink jellyfish on the front cover. I made a little kraken to go with that one. And then Karen Viggers actually contacted me on email, on Facebook, and said, hey, I've written about Tasmanian devils. How would you feel about making one of those? Now, normally I make the decisions about what I'm going to make, but Karen offered me a free book and I couldn't resist that. And plus I had a really cute pattern for a Tasmanian devil. So I made that, and that was a very nice exchange as well. And then there were a couple more. So I made a crab for my friend Kirsten Kraft. That's actually not referenced in her novel. It was based on something else she wrote, but she loves mud crabs, so I made that one for her. I made a magpie inspired by Tony Birch's The White Girl. Magpies are actually really tricky to make, and they are referenced in a lot of Australian literature, but they're quite tricky. Then down in the bottom left-hand corner, that's a koi fish, which was inspired by my friend Tui On's poetry collection, Turbulence. And Dictionary of Lost Words, I'm sure there are people here who've read that one. It's been such a popular read, beautiful, beautiful book. And I was so inspired by it. I literally sat down as soon as I finished it and made a poppy. I happened to have all the wool that matched the poppies on the front cover of the book. And I made that for Pip Williams and turned it into a bookmark for her. So literally what I was doing was just making these little critters, putting the photos up on social media and sending the finished products to the authors. This was happening at a time in my life which was actually quite difficult. In addition to the whole COVID thing, I lost both my parents, my mum during the first lockdown, my dad during the second lockdown, and this just felt like something I could do to not be thinking about grief, and something I could do to just be contributing, as I say, to little moments of happiness in these otherwise bleak times. And funnily enough, I did also read about taking care of your mental health during this time. And one of the things it recommended was small acts of kindness. So I just thought, it's interesting that I was just driven instinctively to do this, because I think it's really been enormously helpful for my mental health. Anyhow, after all of these, little critters, and there's lots of critters happening, and people are trying to draw my attention to the critters in their books. Now it's become quite competitive, and I had to put rules out. I had to say, look, here's the rules of literary critters. I don't do commissions. I don't want to be paid for what I make, because I want it to be purely whimsical for me. But if you suggest something and I happen to have the wool in my stash and I happen to have a nice pattern, or I'm curious about it, then I might make it for you. But I'm not going to be kind of strong-armed into doing anything. This is really about pleasure, not obligation. I like to make things particularly inspired by Australian literature. And I can't remember what else I said, but it was sort of, it was very loose rules, but, mostly it comes down to what I'm interested in, what I'm curious about. I will work for free books, but, it's just me. Anyway, somewhere in the midst of this, and I think it came about as someone responding to a Facebook post where I posted some critters, that this book was brought to my attention, Animals Make Us Human. It's edited by Leah Kaminsky and Meg Keneally. Leah, both of whom you would probably know. Leah is a GP and fiction writer, award-winning fiction writer. Meg Keneally also writes fiction. She's written several crime novels with her father, Tom Keneally. And I happen to know both Leah and Meg through the writing community. And I got wind of this project, and it's this incredible book that brings together more than 40 writers. Some of them are fiction writers. You can see the names on the screen: Tony Birch, Mark Brandt, Geraldine Brooks, Melanie Cheng, but also there's a range of science writers. And the book came about as a response to the bushfires. It was something that Leah and Meg did in the face of that terrible destruction. Put the book together. It's all about Australian animals, and the proceeds go to the Australian Wildlife Conservancy and the Australian Marine Conservation Foundation. And I thought, first I thought, why didn't they ask me to write an article for this? I would have loved to have done that. And then I got over myself and thought, what can I do to help this book? What can I do to help draw attention to this book and to help promote this book? And of course, the literary critters idea came into my head, especially as bizarrely, now I'll see if this comes up in the next slide. Oh yes, so one of the patterns I happened to have was for a creature called a Glaucus Atlanticus, or a blue nudibranch. And this was one of the critters featured in the book. That photo at the top of the slide is the photo that appears in the book, Animals Make Us Human. The photo is by Steve Smith, and Ashley Hay is the person who's written about the Glaucus Atlanticus. So I had this, through a bizarre set of circumstances involving a woman in California, I managed to get hold of the Glaucus Atlanticus pattern. It was something like 49 different parts. So it wasn't actually hard to make. It was just incredibly fiddly, but I loved it. And, I was very, as you can see from the smile on my face, I was very chuffed with the way it turned out. So I contacted Leah and Meg and said, look, how would you feel if we made critters? If we made woolen versions of the animals that are featured in this book, and we could post the pictures to social media, and we could send the creatures to Penguin Random House that's publishing the book, and they could use them for marketing purposes, give them to the authors to pose with on social media, what have you. Anyway, of course, they well, happily, not of course, but they jumped at the chance. But at this stage, I think it was 5 weeks to publication date, and there were over 40 animals featured in the book. So I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. So I put a call out through Facebook to start with, to a number of writers I knew who were also crafters. There are quite a few of us. And so also to some other friends, some of whom were archivists, some of whom were librarians, some of whom were just avid readers and avid crafters. And I sort of said, this is the project, would you be interested? I'd done a spreadsheet and put it on Google Docs, and it had a list of all the animals and all the authors who'd written about the animals, and I had links to patterns, possible patterns that people could use. But some of the animals didn't have patterns at all. You know, lyrebird, couldn't really find a pattern to reference a lyrebird. But I put them all out there anyway and sent an email and said, if you're interested, go on and have a look at the document and stick your name in the table next to the animal that you'd like to create. And I was astonished not only by the response, well, I say astonished by the response. Crafters are notoriously generous people. I think, Jenny, you indicated that in what you were saying about the Coco.
Very, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, and that was partly why I wanted to even try this exercise. I thought, okay, we're in lockdown in Melbourne. Everyone needs something to do. Crafters are incredibly generous people. This is a fundraiser for wildlife organisations. I know it will attract people. So after that kind of heart in the mouth moment of, what if no one puts their hand up? Everything just started to happen. So all these people put their hands up, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what they've created. So the next one, okay, so there's a few of mine in here first. So there's a combination of what happened was people went for patterns. So this is I'm really a pattern follower rather than a pattern maker. This beautiful pattern for a red-tailed black cockatoo, or it's actually a glossy cockatoo that's written about in the book, came from Ashley Radalji, and I'm on Ravelry. I don't know if some of your crafters might also know about Ravelry, the online crafting community where
I've heard some of our members discuss Ravelry quite often and suggest patterns to me.
Yeah, fabulous source of patterns, some of which are free and some of which you purchase. I'm a great believer in paying artists for their intellectual property, so I'm always really happy to pay for patterns. And this was one that I found on Ravelry, and I absolutely loved this pattern. It was a real pleasure to make, as you can see again from the smile on my face. Let's have a look at the next one. Okay, so these 3 patterns. Now, some of you crafters might recognise these. They come from an old Cleckheaton pattern book called Wildlife in 8-ply, and they're all Australian wildlife. Wombat, which was made by Pearl Longden, the ringtail possum, which is made by my friend Diana Baker, the platypus by Wendy Bridges. I've never even met Wendy. She just contacted me on Facebook and she sent me her email, and so there's a whole lot of people who are involved in this project that I haven't actually met, but I'd really hope to one day. So this beautiful collection, it's an old book by Barbara Lennon, and the birds that I showed in the first slide were actually from this pattern book. She's got something called the Native Bird Mobile, and they're the birds I've been making for years. I make Barbara's patterns, and then I also consult my very handy Australian birds field guide and just adapt the patterns. So if Barbara has a cockatoo, sulphur-crested cockatoo pattern, I've adapted it for, yellow-tailed black cockatoos and red-tailed black cockatoos and all of that kind of thing. But this is a lovely, lovely pattern book of Australian natives. And so a number of the, what we're calling the literary crafters, I'm calling them I came up with a collective noun for them the other day. I'll have to look it up. But yes, this group, so a number put up their hands to knit critters from Barbara Lennon's book. And then we also had, let's have a look. Okay, here's Jay Ford, who's a Newcastle-based crime writer, and she made a Tasmanian devil, so it's the same pattern I'd made earlier, and a little wombat that she crocheted. Very, very cute arigurumi animals. Let's see what else. My friend, now hang on, have I skipped one? No, I think this is where we're up to. Okay, so my friend Helen, the slides I showed earlier were, patterned based based animals. And then we had a series that were adapted. So this little one, the greater glider, which is a really super cute animal, Victorian native animal. Obviously there wasn't a pattern for it, but my friend Helen, who's an archivist, looked up all the technical drawings and then adapted a pattern for a sugar glider and turned it into the greater glider, which I think is absolutely gorgeous. What else did we get in the adaptations? Oh, yes. Okay, so this is one that I adapted the same pattern to make a leadbeater's possum, which is one of the most endangered creatures in Victoria. This was quite tricky to make, but again, it was a lovely kind of challenge. The original pattern was called Sassy the Sugar Glider by a pattern maker called Charlene Smith, who also goes by the Cheerful Chameleon, which I love. And then, this is Gabrielle Wang, who some of you might know as a children's author. And Gabrielle's sister-in-law made that little critter, which is called a phascogal. It's a little Australian mouse-like marsupial. And Alison adapted a bilby pattern to make that. And Gabrielle painted the beautiful phascogals to go with it. So that's absolutely gorgeous. Super cute little animal and super cute critter. And then what did we get? And then we go, so we've gone through the actual patterns, the adapted patterns. These are the things that people made up from scratch. Astonishing. Now this is a lyrebird, of course, which was made by Fiona McDonald. So Fiona when I put the call out on Facebook, and I said, are there any writers out there who are also crafters who'd like to be part of this project? Fiona contacted me and said, I write knitting patterns. Would that be okay? I was like, yes. And you can find Fiona's work on Ravelry. She usually makes dolls, but she made this absolutely exquisite lyrebird. It was just a work of art, really. Then Fung Ling Kong, who is an editor. Fung Ling had made this, I might have a photo of it here, I'm not sure. She made a collection of corals and shells to go with one essay in the book, and then turned her skills to a bird that's called a spotted harrier. I didn't even think anyone could make it, and look at what she came up with. It's absolutely beautiful. So again, she's made this from scratch without a pattern. Spotted harrier in the book. Another one that was made from scratch, Tracy Sorensen. I really want to single her out for special mention. Tracy's a novelist. She has written one of the essays in the book, In Animals Make Us Human, which is about corals and shells. And she has crafted several of the animals, she's an amazing craftswoman, and she's crafted several of the critters for this book, including a bush stone curlew, which you can see there on the screen, which she's made the pattern up from scratch. I mean, she's astonishing, absolutely astonishing. There were I think there were 3 people who contributed essays to the book, who also ended up making critters for the literary critters component of the book, but they didn't make critters for their own essays. They made them for other people, which I thought was really beautiful.
So Angela, did most of the essays in the book end up with something created for them?
All of them did.
All of them did. That is amazing, isn't it?
All of them did. Yeah, I think the only one that didn't was Paul Kelly. There's a song by Paul Kelly in the story that doesn't actually mention any specific animal. There is a photo of a rainbow lorikeet next to the story, which I may still get to make. I may still pull out a rainbow lorikeet, but every other critter that's referenced in the book has actually been made by someone. So every author who was involved will get a critter.
So after they've used it for all the marketing and everything, sorry to interrupt, but
no, that's all right. No, please.
Sorry. So after they've used all of the critters that have been made for marketing and things like that, is the idea to auction them off or do something like that? How will they be used? It's a shame for them to go to.
Well, I think, look, that's a good question, and we have tossed that around a lot. I've talked a lot with the authors at Penguin and with the editors. It's tricky because some pattern makers don't like you profiting from the sales. Mind you, because this is a fundraiser, I think we could probably get around it. But what we've decided, and also a number of the crafters kind of made the animals for the author. So they looked down the author list and went, oh, I'd like to make something for Sean Tan. And so they kind of made it with the idea of giving it to the author as a gift. So what I think we've gone with, the idea we've gone with, is that they will end up with the authors, and then the authors can decide what to do with them. So if the authors want to auction them off or offer them as prizes for reviews or something like that, then they're very welcome to as part of a fundraising effort. But yeah, I think, as I say, Penguin will use them for marketing purposes as well, and then they'll engage and consult with the authors as to what to do with them next.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll talk at the end about another project that's coming up where some of these critters could even end up back with this new project.
Yes.
But a couple more. Oh, so here's another one that, so my friend Helen made the Blue Groper from scratch. And again, she looked at scientific pictures and, worked out all of the ratios and put that together. And that's a critter that Meg Keneally has written about in the book. Beautiful piece by Meg. And coming towards the end of, I'm not supposed to have favourites, but this was the only one. This was the one when I looked at it, I went, I really want that one. It is a grey-headed flying fox, and it's made by a crafter called Lucy Ward. I mean, Lucy's extraordinary, and she makes these patterns up. She's quite extraordinary. So look at that little face.
It's a gorgeous face. You couldn't help but love that face.
I know, right? And then, there's the flying fox hanging upside down with its great big wings. There's actually 2 writers who've written about flying foxes in the book, and we've got 2 flying foxes, one of which was supplied by Tracy Sorensen, who, when she first saw the spreadsheet, said, oh, if no one else puts their hand up for a flying fox, I have a spare one. That's why I love her. All right, and then the next one, let me see. Oh, no, that's just me. All right, so we come back to my books. So, so that's really the story of literary critters. And as I say, it sort of got bigger than, it got huge, and it was just a fantastic experience. And I know I sound like a really bad episode of Australian Story, but my father died at the beginning of this project, early on into this project. And to have people contact me to want to be part of the project, to send me photos of their critters, it just created another, something else to think about, just these little moments of joy at a very sad time for me. So it's really been an important part of my well-being and mental health.
I think that's a very important thing to acknowledge, because crafting does create a sense of well-being, and I've seen that in the groups over the last few years. It's not just about what they're making. Of course, that's an important part of it, but true friendships have been formed. There's been connections, there's been the caring for each other, and the fact that people are willing to make incredibly intricate designs and in both clothing and toys and things like that for charity, using really high quality resources and yarns and things like that. It just amazes me. And I have been inspired by people that have come along to the craft groups, and also it is a true sense of well-being when you're crafting. I do a little bit myself. This is, I don't know if you can see that very well, but
I'm going to stop screen sharing so that I can. Let me have a look.
It's a little dog that I've made, and I've made several.
Oh, that's cute as.
And several little cats too as well, from a book called My Mini Farmyard Critters, I think it's called. It's in the library. I got it from the library. But it's been wonderful for me, because if someone's feeling sad or upset, I can knit one of these and just give them to people, and it puts a smile on their face. And
this is it.
Yes, yeah. So
it's such a simple thing to do.
Yeah, very simple for me to make those. But I love doing it because every single one is a little bit different, and you can share it with people. And talking about, sort of grieving and loss, I've also got here, this is show and tell, isn't it? But my mother knitted this, and it was one of the last things she ever knitted before she died. And it's a bit funny looking, and it's been, it's got a bit moth-eaten now and stuff like that. But I really cherish that. It's one of the, in fact, it's the only thing I've got knitted that she knitted left. So I'm so glad I've got it, even though it is a bit daggy.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned your mum, Jenny, because I mentioned that my mother died during the first lockdown, and she was a great knitter. And in fact, she was knitting in palliative care. She was still knitting for a project called Wrap with Love, which is another not-for-profit beautiful program that provides blankets to people in need, both in Australia and overseas. And there are, there's specifications. You can knit or crochet the blankets. And Mum was admittedly doing some pretty crazy knitting. I had to pull it out. But I remember this moment where I was fixing up a square that she'd done, and I said, tell me the instructions. Can you tell me the pattern? And she was she was on so much morphine at the time that, neither her thoughts nor her words were coming easily. But I just gave the knitting to her and I said, show me. And of course it was muscle memory. She could just do it perfectly.
Yes.
And I have to confess though that I took all the squares that she'd made for the last blanket and I gave them to my cousin to sew together, because I mentioned earlier I hate sewing. And I intended to give it up to Wrap with Love, but my cousin brought the blanket back and she said, you might want to keep this one. You might want to hold on to it for a little while. Yes. And of course, I'm so glad I did, because now I can wrap it around myself and feel my mum's presence very close to me. But, I'm very conscious that these projects have been very much inspired both by the fact that my mum was a great knitter and by the fact that both my mother and father were very community-minded people. So, it feels like a way of honouring their legacy as well as giving me something to think about other than being sad all the time.
Yes, I could imagine it would have been something to hang on to almost, in a really difficult time. And I'm so glad you kept the blanket. I really am, because I could imagine you cherishing that down the track for years to come. Yes. I mean, my mum's been gone for 37 years and I'm still cherishing that. So
yes, and the things she made me too, she did make me she made me wrist warmers and scarves, and I feel her, like I've never considered myself a very materialistic person, but I just feel her presence really strongly through the things, particularly the things she made. It's lovely to, and I love that whole notion of Wrap with Love. It's like this way of feeling that that maternal love again.
Yes, yeah. And I think I probably should have mentioned a little bit more about the Coco Project, because I'm talking as if everyone would know about that, but it's an Australia-wide charity that provides hand knitted and hand crocheted items for people in need. It's actually short for Knit One, Give One, and I know you're familiar with it, Angela, and a lot of our crafters that come to the group are certainly familiar with it. But for those of you who don't know about it, they do have a wonderful website, and they do some wonderful work, some amazing work. So many different charities they provide resources for, and really important work. It's that feeling of connection and helping out. I think. Yeah.
Being able to provide something practical for people, I think, is so important. And I know that for people who've experienced devastation like bushfires and things, they often lose all those handmade and intimate gifts. Being able to replace some of those is really important. Gives people a different sort of sense of legacy or something.
Yes, because everything is different when it's handmade, isn't it? You can follow the exact same pattern, and you can follow that exact same pattern several times over, and still I'm amazed when I create a lot of dolls and things for people. I'm amazed that every single face is just a little bit different. It's just really intriguing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because yes, it's even two people can make the same. As we sort of almost saw with with the Literary Critters Project, we had two whale sharks using the same pattern, but that turned out quite differently. Two people made wombats, and it was kind of a case of, oh, look, they both want to make wombats, and one wants to crochet and one wants to knit. Why not? You can never have too many wombats, kind of thing. And they came out completely differently. But yes, and then even though I said earlier I'm a pattern follower, this particular project has made me a little bit more adventurous, and I've become a bit more of a pattern adapter, at least. So my current project, my new project is to make critters for the window of my local bookshop, Brunswick Bound on Sydney Road.
Yeah.
And I said I'd do something for them because I love them and they've been amazing during lockdown. So I've started on a series of, it's going to be sort of beach inspired, Australian summer. So I've started with a seagull.
Oh, that is very seagully, yes.
This has come from a pattern, there's a wonderful British crafter called Kerry Lord, and she's made all these books. They're called Edward's Menagerie, Edward being her little son. And she's got a book on animals and a book on birds. Her seagull was a European seagull, so I've adapted it as an Australian seagull. And now my 14-year-old has suggested I need to crochet some chips to go and display so the seagull can jump at them. And then after this one, I'm still doing a little bit of pairing of my reading with critters, but I've been approached by someone who's involved in the revival of Aboriginal languages in Victorian early childhood education, and her idea is to make critters that can be given to the children as playthings but also be part of their vocabulary education. So this is this is exactly the sort of thing I'd love to get behind, and I know a lot of the crafters who were involved in Animals Make Us Human would be very keen to be involved in that project as well. And the thing she said to me about why she was keen to have us involved is because the critters are so specific. Like, they're not generic parrots, they're red-tailed black cockatoos, or, so it's that kind of thing that they're after for the early childhood education project.
You mentioned also very early on in your conversation that you get inspired by what you're reading all the time. So a lot of books wouldn't necessarily have a picture of an image of an animal on the front cover, but how do you decide what animals you would grab out of a book? Like, are they mentioned in an extensive way, or is it just something that grabs at you when you're reading?
It's just something that grabs at me. So one of the ones I did recently was a little stingray that was inspired by Jock Sarong's new book, The Burning Island. Now, Jock writes about a lot of different animals in it, but there's a particular scene where the female character Eliza is looking through a viewing box through the water at a shipwreck below, and the ray passes between her and the shipwreck, and it's just this kind of moment of it's very beautiful, but it's very foreboding as well. And that scene really stayed with me. So it's like, oh, and also I had a pattern for a stingray that I was really keen to try out. So so it's usually that combination. So there's something in the book that sparks my imagination, and something in my library of favorited patterns in Ravelry where I think, oh, I'd really like to try that. So I also made a jellyfish for Chrissy Neen, because she's got a beautiful white jellyfish on the front of her novel, An Uncertain Grace. And again, I was curious to crochet a jellyfish, so that was a happy kind of meeting. And I'm now I'm adapting this jellyfish pattern to be a blue bottle, which is going to be part of the beach or the summer scene in Brunswick Bound windows. So yeah, a lot of it is, as I say, it's one of the reasons why I'm reluctant to do commissions, because I like to have that kind of whimsical element to it, where I just go, oh, that's just something that piques my curiosity and I'd like to have a go at it. I've got a couple of, I do come across patterns where I think, oh, I'd really love to make that just to have a go. And I don't feel the need to hang on to things. Like, it's not, I'm not really making them for myself. Mostly I just make them and give them away. There's very few that I really keep in any way.
I think that's a common thing with a lot of crafters, isn't it? That you tend to make things and want to release them into the wild, so to speak. You make them with someone in mind. I generally find I do, unless it's something. You also mentioned that you'd made things for your children's craft.
For the school fete,
yeah, that was the word I was trying to get out. Thank you. For the school fetes, and I've done things like that too. One year I made heaps of Santa Clauses, and bananas in pajamas were a huge hit, and knitted. Seemed like hundreds at the time. It wasn't, but I don't have any of those things left because they were all set free, so to speak. And Same thing with dolls and things that I've made. So really, I've only got 3 hand knitted things here, and I know I've knitted critters like echidnas and birds and other things like that, but I don't even know who they've ended up with. So it's funny how you want them to be out there and shared with other people, don't you? Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's an important part of it, isn't it? Any crafting that you do.
I think it's a difference also between making things that have utility. I mean, I make most of the clothes I make I give away too, but there have been 1 or 2 things I've made for myself, and they're quite lovely to have. But yeah, it's sort of like the more artistic pieces are things you want to release to the world, and that's, I think, again, there's another interesting dynamic for me between the fact that I'm a writer who has not been able to write for most of this year, just with the combination of everything that's been going on plus COVID. I've just found that uncertainty is really bad for my creativity, at least as a writer. So crafting these animals has been a way of creating another outlet for my creativity that also celebrates reading, which I have been doing voraciously during COVID times. So I still feel like I'm staying connected to literature and reading, even though I'm not writing at the moment. And I'm still being creative. And whether I go back to writing or not, I'm just not panicking about it at the moment. But this has been also kind of part of that, part of that motivation has been.
It's a soothing thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It often involves repetition, depending on the pattern, but it's that soothing mindfulness type of activity, I guess.
Yeah.
You mentioned reading too as well, and I wondered what you'd read recently that you could share with us. What's inspired you recently in the way of books?
In terms of the critters, or just in terms of reading in general?
Just in terms of reading in general.
So I've probably got, I've sort of thought about my reading for this year. It falls mostly into one of 2 camps. It's books that have resonated with the times that we're in, and books that have been a complete escape from the times that we're in. So the ones that have resonated that I've really enjoyed have been The Animals in That Country by Laura Jean McKay, and I'm in the process of making a dingo for Laura Jean to go with that book. The dingo is one of the main characters in the book, and it's absolutely fantastic. The premise of the book is that the world has been infected with a virus that enables people to understand what animals are thinking.
Oh, okay. That's
and it's
not where I was going with virus.
And it sends them crazy. It's quite extraordinary. And the way that there's no Dr. Dolittle about it. The animals speak in this incredibly poetic but quite tricky language. And the central character is an older woman who smokes too much and drinks too much, and she's just fabulous. And so there's 2 central characters. There's the older woman and the dingo, and they go on a road trip together. It's fantastic. The Trespassers by Meg Mundell, which is the one I put up earlier. That's also a virus story. It's a story about a ship. It's based on a real historical case, but brought up to date in a kind of slightly dystopian world. And Meg's a beautiful writer, and that one actually won the David Award this year from the Sisters in Crime, best crime novel. Even though it's not a classic crime novel, but it's really beautiful. And I also read The Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, which I'd never got around to. Which is, about the plague of 1665, and about a village that decides to close itself off to avoid infecting other people. And of course, I was reading that in the middle of stage 4 restrictions in Melbourne, which was quite extraordinary. And then the books that have, and probably, Sarah, I would say in a slightly different way, it doesn't actually have a virus in it, but in terms of other things that have been going on in society, Kate Mildenhall's The Mother Fault has been a really interesting read at this time. And then for my escapist reading, I mentioned Stone Sky Gold Mountain earlier by Wurrundjeri Woi Wurrung. Beautiful, beautiful novel. It's historical fiction set in the goldfields of far north Queensland in the 19th century, and it's told from 3 points of view: a Chinese brother and sister and a white woman in a regional town. That's a beautiful novel. I think it won the Queensland Premier's Literary Award. Mammoth by Chris Flynn. So this is just way off. Chris is a very funny writer, and Mammoth made me laugh out loud. The narrative point of view is from a 13,000-year-old mammoth fossil.
Oh.
So it's a bit of a leap of faith. Once you can kind of get beyond that, it's just a stunning read, and it kind of plunges you into a part of history that's really, really interesting, but totally accessible. It's almost like, I said to Chris, it's like watching, Night at the Museum or Horrible Histories or something like that. It's that kind of take on history, and I really did love the blissful escapism of that. And the other one I loved, which again I mentioned earlier, was The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams, and The Yield by Tara June Winch. They are really stunning.
Oh, that's wonderful. I always like to find out what writers are reading and what anyone I talk to is reading, basically. That has been a wonderful, wonderful, insightful talk, and I've really, really enjoyed it. And I'm just wondering if anyone's got any questions, if they'd like to put them up, that would be wonderful. And I can share them with Angela.
Very happy to take questions. Or indeed, I would love to find out what you craft and what your current crafting projects are. So if anyone would like to share that information, that would be terrific.
I can't see anything coming up yet, but Lou's in the background, so no doubt Lou's my colleague. She will be watching to see if anything comes up. In the meantime, I can talk and talk and talk.
Well, I was going to show you too. So I don't know if I mentioned in Animals Make Us Human, though you might have seen it in the slides, that it's not only got this beautiful writing in it, but also these incredible photos. So each story is accompanied by photos. Some of them are from professional photographers and some of them from amateurs, but it's absolutely such a gorgeous product. Really, I do not stand to benefit or profit from this product at all, but I cannot recommend it highly enough to put on your Christmas lists for family.
I think something like that it's important to buy, isn't it? If the money from those sorts of things is going to such a really good cause. The other book that you mentioned that was talking about the virus that was causing people to understand what animals are saying. I'm intrigued by that. One of my lockdown reads has been, I only acquired it at the weekend, Olive, Mabel and Me by Andrew Cotter.
Right.
And it talks about his two Labrador dogs. He's become a bit of a hit on YouTube, but the book is actually wonderful and insightful into the way animals can create a sense of well-being in a really difficult time. Nice. And he talks to the dogs as if they were real, and the dogs, of course, respond to him. Well, I was thinking of that as you were speaking about the book you were telling us all about.
It's a great read. It really is a great read. There's a question that's come through. Yeah. And that so one of them's immediately relevant to what we were just talking about. Linnell has asked, what was the title of the book where animals could understand language? It's actually the other way around. It's humans understanding animal language, Linnell. And the book is called The Animals in That Country. And I'll type in the chat function. I'll put it down so that you can look it up later. It's by Laura Jean McKay. It's a fabulous book. And Laura's a beautiful writer.
If the library doesn't hold it at the present, you can always ask them.
It's a good one it's a really good one to get in, I think. Then Rose has asked, how long did it take you to make each critter? Rose, it does vary according to the kind of construction needed. So the Glaucus Atlanticus that I showed earlier, the blue nudibranch, that crazy aquatic marine creature, was quite time consuming because it just had so many bits, and it had you make 14 of this one and you make 10 of this one and you make 12 of this one, and then you kind of add them in different bits. And I had envelopes going all over my coffee table to hold all the pieces. So that one probably took close to 2 weeks, but I can get through those little birds, the ones from Barbara Lennon's books, I can probably make in 2 movies, because I crochet in front of the telly or knit in front of the telly. So they'd probably be 3 to 4 hours work for each of those. And then, it just depends on the level of kind of complexity and the size to some extent. So there's something about this that I really like. I think it's the colour combination and crazy little red, and the red eyes that go, you know, really well with the red beak. This one's taken, and you know, I love the way she constructs.
Is that knitted or crochet?
That's crocheted. So the way that Kerry Lord structures her books is she has the standard shape. So there's the standard body and the standard head. And then she's got like 5 different wing types, the soaring wing, the ornamental wing, and then about 6 different leg types. So these are the paddling legs, but there's, you know, stalk-like legs, and they're just fantastic. So you can mix and match the parts and make up your own. And in fact, that's what I did for Bruce Pascoe's. Bruce Pascoe wrote an essay about the little black cormorant in Animals Make Us Human. So I made a cormorant by putting together Kerry's books, and I made, you know, I just crocheted the neck longer and put a wire in it to get that nice.
Yeah, I noticed that quite a few of the items must have had wiring in them of some sort. I love Bruce Pascoe's work, so I'll have to have a look.
So he has a beautiful essay in this book as well.
Yeah.
And Maria, thank you for your compliment about the critters being so cute, and also to Linnell about the Brunswick bookshop window. Yes, I'll have to get cracking on that. I had I did have the birds in Fairfield Books window at one stage, but that was just, unfortunately I got them in just before we went into lockdown again. So I don't know that many people saw them. You know, that's I'll see where the next project takes me. I think I plan to keep sort of making things inspired by the reading. One thing I will mention is it wasn't until I started this project that I discovered just how many people love galahs and how often galahs are referenced in Australian writing. It's really been funny. And in fact, I've got hold of Tracy Sorensen's novel on the strength of the relationship I've developed with her through the Literary Critters Project. Tracy's got a novel called The Lucky Galah, which is narrated by a galah. So chances are I'll end up making her a galah as a result of reading this. But that's been really fun.
There'll be authors all over Australia with their little design that you've handcrafted.
I've actually been contacted by people saying, I'm putting a critter in my next novel because I want you to make me something. It's just hilarious.
That's funny.
And then I've got a question here, or a comment from Rose saying, critters for charity, would pattern makers or existing patterns shared with craft groups to make critters which could then donate critters which could be sold to raise money, like the Coco concept? Look, it's a good question, Rose, and it's a good idea. As I say, I think it just does depend on the individual pattern makers. I did contact one woman who's got a lot of native Australian animal patterns on Ravelry, and I told her about the project, and I said, how would you feel about, you know, this, if we did this? And she said, look, I'm okay as long as you don't buy one pattern and share it amongst 10 people. Like if 2 different people want to make the same pattern, they buy it, which is absolutely fair enough, you know.
It's been, I've often read of people creating patterns and not wanting them to be shared commercially or used to, to sell at fates and things like that. And I can understand that. It sort of opens a bit of a risky...
which is why it's lovely for the library to stock pattern books and magazines with patterns in them, because that's a perfectly legitimate way that patterns can be shared and used. But yeah, look, I just say to anyone who's thinking about this or thinking about selling things, there will often be, the pattern makers will often have specifications, so read the fine print, and because you can often find different patterns for the same critter. But the other thing is there's no harm in asking. So in the case of the Glaucus Atlanticus, the pattern maker had gone offline. She just completely shut up shop. And there was no way I could get the pattern, but I noticed on Ravelry that someone else had made it. And I sent a message to her saying, look, this is the project. This is why I want the pattern. I'm happy to pay for it, blah, blah, blah. And she got back to me. She was in California, and she got back to me and said, I actually made this when my husband and I went scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and we started up this lovely conversation, and she sent me the pattern, so I was able to make it. And so the next step is, in fact, when I get off this Zoom call, I'm going to phone Brunswick down and order a copy of this book to send to her in the US.
Oh, that's a wonderful thing to do. I think, yes, because so many craft people love to share. And talking about getting books from the from the library, we do have a huge collection of library books that have knitting patterns and crochet patterns and other patterns. And we also have some great magazines that have a lot of patterns in them too as well. Molly Makes being one of the obvious ones, and a huge collection that's available online through Press Display in particular, which we have, and that's freely available. So if anyone's looking, check it out. It's something that I use all the time. I love Press Display, actually. You'd be familiar with that, Angela.
Yes, and I will also keep that in mind if I need an interlibrary loan from my my own Moreland branch.
Yes, yes, yeah. Is there another question there I can see popped up?
Yes. Okay, just a question about the sessions being recorded. Will a link be posted on the library site, as I know my book club members would love to listen? That's over to you, Jenny.
Yes, we will. We have been recording this. It takes us a few days to edit everything and make sure that everything's all right and that I haven't done anything spectacularly wrong. And then it will be available up online on our YouTube channel and with links to Facebook and other things that we have. So look out for that and please share. Libraries are all about sharing, and Angela is also the new CEO of Public Libraries Victoria. So she's very much an advocate of public libraries and sharing resources, so which is wonderful. Yes.
Absolutely. No, it's a fantastic sector to be part of. I'm really excited, and yes, and I can't wait to get back down to the actual library to see you all.
Yes,
great
we
fun.
Can't wait either. I see one more question, and we might take this as our last question, and then
it's just it's a thank you from Barbara.
Okay.
Thank you for coming, Barbara.
Thank you
to everyone who's come and weighed in, and it's lovely to get that feedback. I hope there's something in this that inspires you, but also I'd love to, as I say, get down and actually see what you're up to at some point. So
yes, we'd love to have you.
Yeah,
in person. It would be wonderful, and who knows what next year will bring for all of us.
Yeah,
in one way or another. So
that'd be really fun.
Yes,
really fun.
Yeah. I'd love it. I'm always up for a talk. I really enjoy it.
Excellent.
Thank you everyone for coming along and joining us today, and thank you in particular to Angela. It's been a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Hope everyone that's made the time to come in their lunch break has enjoyed it, and I know I have, and hopefully we'll see you again, Angela.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks so much for having me, everyone, and happy crafting.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks. Bye, everyone.